we need to rethink how the current team in place is able to respond to this new channel that we haven't really explored before. Then we carve out the time and we say, realistically, here's what it is, here's what I know you want, but like, here's realistically what we're expecting. And you break down the process so they can understand what it takes to be creative.
Welcome to Real Creative Leadership, a place where creative leaders can find insights and practical guidance on the day-to-day job of being a creative leader. We focus on real issues, topics, and insights of creativity in the business world. Join me as we explore the best strategies for developing your team, getting others to embrace your vision, and generating amazing experiences. This webinar series is produced by the Stoke Group. I'm your host, Adam Morgan, Adobe Executive Creative Director and author of Sorry Spock, Emotions Drive Business. And this is Real Creative Leadership. So today I'm excited to talk to Katie O'Brien, Head of Creative Lifestyle and Luxury Brands at Wayfair. And our topic is how you can transform your team from ticket takers to strategic partners. And this is a really interesting topic. And Katie and I spoke earlier about some of these things. So we're going to just dig right in and get your experience of how you've transformed your team. So let's start. When you first joined Wayfair, what was it like? What was the model like? How were you a ticket taking model? And tell me a little bit about that journey.
Sure. Hi, and thank you so much for having me. So when I started at Wayfair 2 years ago, and I was handed an incredibly talented team of designers and copywriters, project managers, like all this sort of thing. And in all of them were like really strong aesthetic and the ability to operationalize like literally anything that could cross their path. Marketing would enter tickets and creatives would pull together, and apply brand guidelines that met their requests, which were interpretations of the data, their interpretations. So like click-through rate and engagement, those sort of things. So this structure really left creative out of the strategic piece, right? So the business partners out of the production too. And so it wasn't collaborative and a lot of things got lost in translation. So with that, and over the last 2 years, we still use the ticket system. So I want to make sure that it's clear that we didn't go from ticket taking to nothing at all. We do time entry. Yeah. I mean, it's a necessary evil. Yeah. So we still use that to organize and manage and track all of our projects, but it's about the conversations before and throughout that have produced the better outputs. So that's kind of where we've grown from in the last 2 years. Gotcha.
And we've talked, even on the last session, we talked a little bit about, there's a maturity model in a creative department. Certainly not that low maturity is bad, it's just that's where you start usually. And it's high quality talent, high quality work, but it's just more production focused. And so moving up that scale of the model to where you're more of a strategic partner, where you're thinking about strategy, creative strategy, marketing strategy, business strategy, and the creative team is actually helping become a valuable asset versus just a center of excellence. That's really, at least some of the direction that we've been talking of, how do you get there? What are the steps you take? And have you seen that in other places you've worked, that different maturity model?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we were talking about it as set of hands, because it's just that sort of extension of your heart, or as I think of it anyway. My experience has been mostly in agency. So of course, with that, because the success of any pitch relied heavily on the collaboration with our client partners and buy-in from them. So that's always been second nature. And in-house, you'd think that it would be tighter, right? Because you're working right alongside, literally alongside, you're sitting across the aisle in some cases from these partners. But it wasn't as focused as that, because Wayfair was started as a very tiny startup and then just blossomed, especially in the last 4 years, really. Some things sort of broke down in that sort of process where it was okay, this will just be faster if we have this group here, and then we were able to hand it over to this group, and then they were able to execute, and then that'll just be the fastest thing. But really, you lose all the conversation and it's kind of over. There are definitely creatives that I think prefer to work. There are the ones that want to just go into their special place and come out with that diamond and it's perfect and it nails it every time. But I don't find that to be the best way to work. And so my whole history has been really collaborative.
And let's talk a little bit more about, so on this journey, because you're right, like production is still valuable. Any mature creative department still needs production. They still need some of those functions, but you just need to mature into where you are thinking broadly about the business and partnering with strategy and other stakeholders. So talk to me about some of the steps you took to help your team get to more of a strategic level.
So introducing briefs, which it might seem like so simple, but I was frankly surprised that they weren't using briefs before I started. And that was something like in the first month that was already in process, which is great that they had realized they needed something like that. But like in the ticket form, there was enough information, but people didn't really, they skipped over a lot of steps like within that. So like understanding that we need an input brief from our marketing partners and a creative brief from our creative team to be able to say, okay, like let's align around an idea. That was a big step. And then yes, there was training and things to sort of get them to that place, training on both ends to make sure that people are following it. And honestly, it's something that we actually continue to iterate on. It has been like constantly refining, like, is this too much information? Like, are there ways to make it better? And that sort of thing, like, which makes total sense. So that was a big part. Creatives just learn to tie all ideas back to the business and bring partners in earlier, like learn how to be a little bit scrappier before you show a round one, because you might actually like not have a round three at that point because you're bringing them in for the nugget of the idea before it turns into that gem.
Yeah, that's interesting. Are there other milestones that as others are trying to transform their team that you saw? So the brief is definitely like kind of an early process. What are other things that, or just signs that you could tell, all right, my team is definitely working at a more strategic level?
Sure. Well, I will say that not everyone is equipped, like not every creative is equipped for this kind of creative thinking. Like I think our team shifted a lot over the last 2 years, and we found that more strategic thinking resulted in less churn, right? And so it did cut a good chunk of our team because we had built up a team that could just sort of execute on a lot of the things that weren't necessarily the right things. And then when you build in all of these efficiencies and you have these better conversations, that's not needed. So that's something to keep in mind. Like that's not the fun thing to sort of talk about, but it's something to just sort of think about. And so it is kind of a milestone. You do reach a point where you're like, okay, the people that we had in our leadership positions were, like managers. They were essentially like really strong project managers, but weren't really able to go to the table with a CMO or a GM and talk through like the business priorities. That wasn't the way that their brain thought. Like they were really strong at executing, like, and motivating a team to be able to execute in the most efficient way possible. And so that's something to kind of keep in mind. Is that what you mean?
Oh yeah. We just had a conversation an hour ago where it goes back to this idea, well, a couple things. First of all, it's always like the battle between the big three things. Is it speed, quality, or time? Or sorry, money, quality, or time, right? Like what are the three things you focus on? And a lot of times I found that new startups or younger organizations, when they're moving just so fast, it often is all about speed, right? It's like, that's why we start with production. We need the ticket takers because we're balancing all these things. Everyone's wearing a million hats and we've got to get this thing out into market. And that's why, startups are in that mode of just pump it through, right? And as you mature, even as a company, like even here at Adobe, it's like we're a mature company and we should really focus more on the quality and the creativity, less so on the speed. And that doesn't mean that we're going to be slow and lame. Like maybe some projects take a little longer because we're focused on it, but it absolutely is like, we'll have the production arm take care of the speed part and then take those who are really thinking strategically to focus on that quality and really get good storytelling, good art, good video, whatever it may be. So well, and the key there too is that like it's easy to get caught up in that speed, right? Like we do these state of creative conversations where we talk to our marketing partners, all of our channel partners, about like just sort of what's been going on in the last six months and like the progress that we've made. And we had this whole conversation around cost per asset. And like, all that, we're very focused on the value for the output and all those sort of things. And we had to take a step back and say like, we are actually in a position right now, because you introduced me as the head of lifestyle and luxury brands. We're actually shifting right now our lifestyle brands. No, this is brand new, hot off the press. Okay. But we're shifting those to focus more on the specialty retail space.
And that is going to take some thinking and some slowing down. And the things that we have automated now, like have been completely automated, we're like, okay, like now we're talking to a different type of customer because like we're providing a new offering. And so we're going to have to, the cost per asset is not really our focus anymore. But we constantly have to remind ourselves of this because it's easy when you're a train, just like making it happen to not step back. And so it's good that we can hold each other accountable with our partners.
Yeah, tell me more about that. How do you balance it? Like, I'm sure people are like, sounds great, let's move to a new model. But how do you balance getting things done and efficiency and then making space for creativity and creative strategy?
Yeah. Well, it's constantly a conversation around prioritization, which sounds also super, boring. But it is like, okay, great. Like if we're going into this way, we're talking about specialty, and now we're talking about introducing catalogs and other type things that our specialty competitors offer their customers. Like we need to rethink how our teams are structured, and then we need to rethink like how the current team in place is able to respond to these kinds of like this new channel that we haven't really explored before, and so like then we carve out the time and we say, realistically, here's what it is, here's what I know you want, but like here's realistically what we're expecting, and you break down the process so they can understand what it takes to be creative, right? Because when your partners are analysts and they just look at data and they're just like making sure it's all chopped up and whatever, you have to sort of explain like, okay, I understand that, but here's how the thinking works. This is like the iterating, like the stuff that has to happen before it comes back to you. And we don't want to lose any of those steps because then you're going to get a basic idea and you don't want that. Right. And so then the more that they understand, just like the more that we understand the data on the other side, when they're saying, okay, this is what it means for click-through rate, and this is why this is our interpretation, where before we weren't even understanding either language, so it's really important.
Let me go in this new direction. So there are so many times we talk theory of like, oh, you've got to change, you've got to do this, this is how you run it. But so many people that I talk to in their organizations have a problem doing that. So what I'd love to hear, your personal journey when you join this team and you're like, all right, I've got to make my team be more strategic. How did you sell that value up? Who did you talk to both sideways and up to try and say, this is, we're going to do it a different way? And were there meetings, were there emails? Like what was the process and the experience for you to get that value demonstrated and then therefore get approval for it?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think in the way that you asked it, though, I think it makes it seem like I came to that conclusion on my own, where quite honestly, like, especially in the first, like Wayfair is all about a proper onboarding. They're so good at it. Like just 2.5 days to start where you're really just like eating up the brand and all of those sort of things, like really just understanding the inner workings. But because they expect you to move so fast, they throw you right into the deep end without any kind of situation. You just have to figure it out. But a big part of our culture is like coffee chats, one-on-ones, like talking to all sorts of different people and like starting to understand why they think what they think. And so then when I jumped in with each individual brand that I oversee and the senior most partners, understanding like what have been your issues to date? Like what are some of the things that you wish, all that kind of stuff, and you bring it back together. It's just so obvious at this point. You don't even really need to make that case. It's just there, right? And so then once you reach that position, then you start to you have check-ins, like periodic check-ins where you're sort of saying, hey, this is what I'm seeing. Like I outlined a 3-year vision, which honestly, a 3-year vision at Wayfair is like, I'm in my 2nd year and I've already nailed it. Cause like, it's like, all right. And that's evolved. Like it evolves every couple months because you really move that fast. But it's like when I outlined, like, this is what I see, I position that and I shop it around to all the key stakeholders that I have to say, like, does this make sense? I want to iterate on this, all this kind of stuff. And then at that point, you're just actioning on it and everybody expects you to because you've already talked through it. So it's really about all of that. It's not really very formal. It's rather informal, but it's something that you just continue to, people are so quick to adapt that it tends to just land right. I mean, I made it sound very easy. I think it probably was a little harder than that, but it's all about bringing people along for the ride.
Well, I've heard somewhere it's like real decisions are made in one-on-one conversations, not, presentations. So that makes sense to me where it's the workshopping, right? It's you had to build relationships with all those different key important people, talk to them, reason through it, and have it just a good, just heart-to-heart conversation. I think that's exactly the way I would approach it. I would just go up the list, one by one.
Yeah. Well, and like my background, like the agency that I was at previous to Wayfair, I worked in the live event space. So doing like experiential brand experiences, all that kind of stuff. And we were very focused on design thinking. And so we would do these like really immersive workshops that like, were so helpful to get like to have these conversations. And I was able to do it on a lighter level with my teams. And so that's how you're able to get to it even more quickly than you would just a coffee chat. So like just making sure that you're carving out the right time to really look at people in the face and like unpack like, oh, have you thought about it this way? Or like workshop on an idea. Get people kind of out of their whatever their day-to-day is, I find to be incredibly useful.
So it sounds like everyone needs to get trained in a design thinking, workshopping certificate. Maybe not, but at least learn the skill.
There's tons of tools out there that can allow you to fake it.
Oh, that's awesome. All right, let's see the next question. So another hallmark of like, part of being a creative leader is creating the right environment. So not just selling up, getting approvals, getting the vision sold, but also how do you make the space for it to really happen? So what are some hallmarks, in your opinion, of a good creative department that has matured to this higher model? What are some good signs that they're working well and you're creating that environment?
Right. It's a great question. I think like the key one is like psychological safety. So like just making people feel okay to screw up, like to just make a wrong answer, because that's the kind of the whole point of all of this. I think sometimes people, especially when you're in production mode and not in strategy mode, like you're focused on that, like that just executing it has to be right the first time, every time. And so making sure that you're creating a space where, hey, it's okay, we learn from it, and so like celebrating failures, I think is a really big one. As well as wins, like not just celebrating the failures, but just making sure all of that is happening. But I think those are the keys to me.
And how often do you check in on that? So is it constantly, or is it like quarterly you're going to look at things, or how can companies kind of do an audit to make sure they're doing more or being better? What's kind of
That's a good question. Yeah, I don't know if we're necessarily doing that perfectly right now. I think it's about that being part of the culture. So being able to call out certain things. We have a thing where at Wayfair where you can give people like Wayfair bucks. So everybody has like a certain amount of money that's just like Wayfair dollars that you can spend on more furniture and decor and things like that.
That's
Yeah, and so like you have a certain amount a year that you can give to people for like just crushing it or like knocking it out of the park, but like also encouraging that be about like somebody that just worked through something and like maybe just took a full dump on it, just like really didn't, but it's like knocked it out of the park in terms of like keep, moving on to the next thing. Like we don't focus on the past or what we screwed up. It's like you focus on that sort of future and just making sure that's happening. It's constantly a conversation in our one-on-ones, like me as a manager to my managers, and then for them to their team, and to make sure that we're surfacing all of that kind of stuff. We talked once about having like a fail wall. We had a blank wall, and just like having things where like something that just super bombed, or maybe that went really well, in terms of like collaborating with our partners, and we were all really excited about the work that we did, but the click-through rate wasn't there because of one reason or another, but we were still super proud of it. And so making sure that we're hanging that stuff up. I've seen it at various places, and I think it's fun, just to make sure that you're celebrating that.
Yeah, and maybe that by doing an outward facing thing, that's what makes it okay, makes the team feel safe. And maybe even stakeholders, when they see it, they're like, okay, I definitely don't want my project on that wall, but I understand that it's part of growth. That's fair.
Yeah, what did we learn from that? Like celebrate that.
What about when your team is scaling? So it's great when it's like you get your house in order, everyone's all on the same page, or, I don't know if it's for you. For me at Adobe, it's a big company, 22,000 people. Stuff's changing all the time. We'll get a new partner, a new marketing manager, a new something, just attrition. So how do you ensure that when you're scaling, you just find that you're just like constantly fighting the same things over and over, or trying to organize the same thing over and over? Or how do you do that?
Yes and no. I think it's a good question. Like, I mean, our marketing partners actually turn over a lot more than our creative partners, I would say, because like we have these analysts that are just really strong analysts, and they don't necessarily, want to be in direct mail forever, and they're like, okay, nailed that. Now I'm going to move over to email. And I'm like, wait, no, we just like we had a great relationship. Like we really worked through this and like we were getting somewhere. And so that part can be tough, but we have like a marketing creative strategy group that kind of helps with that internal training and education to make sure that we're able to pick up right where we left off. We set certain expectations and things like that, that it's easier for people to be onboarded. Because I think it was a little bit of a crapshoot beforehand. Like we've really reached that point where the second somebody goes, I mean, I had 2 people start while we were working from home. 2 leaders start while I was working from home, which is tough. Like those coffee chats that I was talking about and things like that, like those are a little bit harder to do virtually, right? I mean, though we're doing it right now and I don't have a coffee, but yeah, exactly. But like just making sure that you have all of the proper processes in place so that they can do it no matter what happens, I think is really important. So that's why process still is a big part, even though you're trying to shift to be more strategic thinkers.
Well, and here's another thought, like as you talked about analysts and I think metrics and I think process, like how do you measure if it's not, because like a ticket taking system is great because it's like things come in, we take account of the time and then here's how long it takes and this is the price and X, Y, Z. How do you measure projects or success or people or department?
Yeah, well, it's, I mean, because it is like there are parts of it that are just click-through rate, right? Like click to purchase, that kind of stuff like that are definitely the ones that we focused on. But then we have brand trackers. We have a brand team that focuses on like awareness and loyalty and all of that kind of stuff. We have a full team that's dedicated to doing qual and quant research on that end to make sure that we're resonating with people on that end, because like that's stuff that isn't measured in just general data, right? And so you just want to make sure that that stuff is constantly being looked at. And then it's also like some of this work is how people are following it and living the brand within, right? So like a lot of my work, because it's strategic, we're like revolutionizing our brand guidelines, right? So really we're taking that to another level. And so it's how somebody on merchandising or somebody on the store, or we call our user experience team, our storefront team, that are building the product, how well they can articulate our messaging. And so like doing internal surveys and understanding all that kind of stuff, I think those all feed into the success of any of the work that we do.
I love that I didn't hear, oh yes, we put RFID tags in every, creative's wrist and we track their time and where they are. Like, it's just nice to know. It's like, no, we're going to look at the general health of the brand, health of the company, sales, other things, and how we're contributing to that. I love that. Work at that angle instead. Tell us some of the milestones of your career. Talk about some of the things that, not necessarily all the places you worked, but what are the things that you learned as you moved along and got you to where you are today?
Sure. Well, I think, it's a little bit rare for people to go into college knowing exactly what they want to do, but I did identify that actually immediately and went specifically to Syracuse for communications design because of their program. I interned at a tiny little agency in, I'm from the Massachusetts, like the South Shore area, and they did a lot of work for Disney and things like that. And I worked there mostly doing their time entry and picking up their lunch and, building boxes and packaging up their mechanicals and things like that. But I did it because I loved designing, record albums or mix CDs and mixtapes and things like that. And like, I loved the idea, like creation, and so I went to school specifically for that. But I think the road that I took in order to get to Wayfair is not as you would expect, though it's all laddered up into creative. So I started in-house at a tech company. I lasted there about a year because I got bored. I had done their brand and was like, all right, is there really anything else to do? There probably was, but I think I got a little bit over it. Yeah. Then I went to a small magazine company to do magazine design there. Then I went to event branding and marketing, doing more like high level branding, but like it was really a lot of reg brochures and things like that, not able to having to hand over guidelines to people that would bring it to life within the event space. Then I went to a communications firm doing like advertising and PR and did a lot of really interesting work there. But I then moved on from that. Like I built up teams within digital immersive spaces and got to extend it out to various things. And then went back to the event world, but on that other side that I didn't get to do before, where I got to bring all that branding, do the branding, but also bring it to life person to person. And then I came here because I wanted to do it for a single brand. I wanted to be able to like really immerse myself with my partners, live and breathe everything, and help influence how the brand is created and shown to the world. So it's like, it's all creative, but it's a little bit weird because it seems like I get bored easily, but I stick with creative as the theme.
I don't think that's unusual. I think a lot of creative spirits just have to wander a little bit. There's that wanderlust of just learning and growing and trying different things until you land on a space where you feel like you've got something to offer the world. So
totally. I call it following a vibe because I've also moved, like I was in DC for 9 years, then San Francisco for 8 years, and now I'm back in Boston where I was born, but hadn't lived in for 22 years. So you just got to follow a vibe. I think it feels really good.
All right, follow the vibe. That's the start here. Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, maybe any advice you would have for other leadership roles in creativity, like how they can better shift from understanding business or showing more of a value and moving away from production into a higher value role?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say care. I mean, right? Like, it's interesting. The reason why it's a good question and why, I guess I'm stumbling over the answer is because I majored in communications design. So it's very specific to communicating an idea and a strategy. So that's always been the most interesting thing to me. So how it looks doesn't really matter. It's really the framework for whatever the meat is, the heart is. So I think if you are focused on, because I do need people that are just focused on how good it looks and how great it sounds and all those sort of things. And I can help guide that. But if you want to be more strategic, it's about really learning, translating for the business, what is exciting to you, because if it's exciting to you and you can translate that for the world, then I think it will be more impactful. I mean, I think when you think about creative without strategy, it's just the what, right? Yeah. And without the why. And so you can say yeah, the what can be gorgeous, right? But without the why, you don't have really the legs for it to continue to evolve and really that connection with your consumers that they're going to be able to have. So I think getting jazzed about that, I think, is the first step. And then you can dig in and learn about it. I mean, it was the way I was with I wasn't very excited about psychology and things like that. I wasn't really into it. It just didn't translate in my brain when I was in college. But then once I was able to find that hook, I was all in, and so just and also I use it now to apply to anything that I do, but get excited about it. And then, your viewers will too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. In my experience, it's the thinkers. You want to find or become a person who's focused on thinking deeply about the feelings, the why, the where it's going, and getting at a higher, 20,000 foot view of everything rather than just deep in the weeds. It's hard to find, but 100%, those are the skills that make you a great leader versus just the hard skills.
Yeah, I love that.
Well, great. We're kind of at time now. So thank you so much, Katie, for a wonderful chat about how to transform your team and move it on to more of a strategic partnership with other stakeholders in your business. I really appreciate you coming.
Of course. Thank you so much.
And the other ways you can find us, so realcreativeleadership.com. And also I'd like to thank Stoke again for producing this podcast. You can find them at thestokegroup.com. And as always, you can find me at adamwmorgan.com. And we hope to connect and hear more from you. So thank you so much for staying with us. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to Real Creative Leadership. I'm your host, Adam Morgan. And this series was brought to you by the Stoke Group. For the most effective marketing, use both sides of your brain to align your strategy, creative execution, and analysis. Connect with the Stoke Group for help designing each step of your marketing plan and creating a coherent vision. Visit thestokegroup.com to learn more.